January 30th, 1943. Near Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The steel helmet sat heavy on his head as Unteroffizier Klaus Richter peered through the commander's cupola of his Panzer III, watching American troops dig positions in the rocky soil ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert terrain, and dust clouds rose from the American positions where soldiers worked frantically with entrenching tools. These Americans carry nothing but rifles and metal tubes on their shoulders. What kind of anti-tank weapons are those supposed to be? Surely not serious weapons against proper German armour. These words, spoken to his gunner just minutes earlier, would soon prove to be the first of many fatal underestimations. Behind him, 5 other tanks of the 21st Panzer Division rumbled forward, their tracks churning up clouds of fine desert sand that had plagued both sides since the fighting began in North Africa. The division, reformed after its destruction at El Alamein, contained veterans who had fought across Poland, France, and the Western Desert. They knew their business, understood tank warfare, and had confidence born from years of victory. They had spent the past year demonstrating to Italian allies and French colonial forces how proper German armour could only be stopped by heavy-towed guns, the massive 88mm flak cannons that required prime movers to transport, or other tanks with comparable armament. The British 2-pounder and American 37mm anti-tank guns had proven inadequate against the latest German armour upgrades. What none of them knew was that within weeks they would witness a weapon so simple, so portable, yet so devastatingly effective that it would force a complete reconsideration of armoured warfare doctrine that had governed military thinking since the Spanish Civil War. The 6 tank crews, advancing confidently against what appeared to be lightly armed American infantry near the eastern dorsal mountains, were about to experience an anti-tank weapon that contradicted everything they had been taught about the superiority of German armour and the impossibility of infantry stopping tanks without heavy weapons. Sergeant Edward Purcell of the 1st Infantry Division studied the approaching German armour with determination rather than fear. A veteran of the torch landings, he had trained extensively with the new weapon but had never used it against German armour. Enemy tanks, yet targets within reach of his new weapon. Within days, these German crews would discover that American ingenuity had produced something their intelligence reports never mentioned, a weapon that would be captured, copied, and ultimately feared more than any Allied tank. But first, they would experience its shocking effectiveness firsthand. The revolution had actually begun 8 months earlier on May 20th, 1942, at the General Electric plant in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The first production M1 rocket launcher, officially designated 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1, but soon to be nicknamed Bazooka, after comedian Bob Burns's musical instrument, rolled off the assembly line into the hands of U.S. Army ordnance officers. The development had been remarkably rapid, driven by observations from the European theatre where German tanks were dominating battlefields and traditional anti-tank rifles had proven completely inadequate. The weapon's genesis traced back even further to the work of Dr. Robert Goddard, the father of American rocketry, who had demonstrated a tube-launched rocket concept to the Army in 1918, just days before the armistice. That concept had languished for 2 decades, until the urgent need for infantry anti-tank weapons revived interest. Captain Edward Uhl, tasked with creating a delivery system for the new M10-shaped charge grenade, had discovered by accident that a simple steel tube could serve as a launcher. Walking past a scrap pile, he found a tube that happened to be the right diameter and realized this could be the answer to their problem. Colonel Leslie Skinner provided the rocket expertise, creating a propulsion system that would burn out before the rocket left the tube, eliminating dangerous backblast that could injure the operator. The shaped charge warhead, based on the Monroe effect discovered in 1888, focused explosive energy into a jet of superheated metal traveling at 25,000 feet per second, capable of penetrating armor far exceeding what conventional explosives could achieve. Among the first weapons shipped overseas were those bound for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. In November 1942, early production versions of the M1 launcher and M6 rocket were hastily supplied to U.S. invasion forces, though General Dwight D. Eisenhower was shocked to learn on the night before the landings that none of his troops had received instruction in the weapon's use. Training materials hadn't kept pace with production, and many soldiers would learn to operate the bazooka in combat conditions. The M6 rocket could theoretically penetrate up to 3 inches of armor, sufficient to destroy most tanks then in service. The Panzer III, backbone of German armored forces, had armor ranging from 30 mm to 50 mm depending on the model. The Panzer IV, increasingly common in 1943, had been upgraded with additional armor plates, bringing frontal protection to 80 mm, but sides and rear remained vulnerable at 30 mm. Even this improved armor was within the bazooka's capabilities when hit at favorable angles. The scale of production was unprecedented. General Electric's Bridgeport plant was producing 5,000 units monthly by late 1942, with additional contracts awarded to other manufacturers. While Germany struggled to produce complex anti-tank guns requiring skilled workers, precision machining, and scarce materials like tungsten for armor-piercing rounds, American factories were churning out bazookas using simple manufacturing techniques. The tube was basic steel, the sight a simple wire frame, the electrical system borrowed from flashlight technology. The contrast would prove decisive. By late January 1943, American forces had advanced into Tunisia, where they would face their first serious test against veteran German armored units. The terrain of Tunisia, with its mountain passes, valleys, and limited road networks, would prove ideal for the bazooka's employment. Unlike the open desert where tanks could maneuver freely and engage at long range, Tunisia's restricted terrain brought combat to closer quarters, where the bazooka's 300-yard maximum range was less of a limitation. The 21st Panzer Division, veterans of the Afrika Korps, viewed the American forces with professional skepticism. They had heard reports of American inexperience, their defeat at Kasserine was anticipated, and German commanders expected to repeat their successes against Green troops. Their assessment would soon change dramatically. On February 14, 1943, German forces launched their offensive at Sidi Bou Zid. The attack was part of Operation Frühlingswind, Spring Wind, designed to throw American forces back through the mountain passes and potentially capture the supply base at Tebessa. Hauptmann Wilhelm König of the 10th Panzer Division led his company forward confidently. His Panzer IV, with its upgraded 50mm frontal armor and long-barreled 75mm gun, was among the best tanks in North Africa. The L-43 gun could penetrate any Allied tank at combat ranges, and the armor had proven adequate against British 2-pounders and American 37mm guns. The Americans ahead appeared to have only infantry weapons. The morning attack began well for the Germans. The 1st Armoured Division's Combat Command A was caught dispersed and unprepared. German tanks overran forward positions, and American Sherman tanks found themselves outgunned by the German long 75mm guns. But as German tanks pursued retreating American forces, they encountered something unexpected. The first indication something was wrong came when Feldwebel Otto Weber's Panzer IV suddenly exploded on their right flank. The crew barely had time to register the hollow thump of the shaped charge detonation before secondary explosions tore the tank apart. Not from an anti-tank gun, whose muzzle flash and smoke would have been visible. Not from another tank, which would have been spotted by accompanying infantry. The crew saw 2 American soldiers with a metal tube disappearing behind a rocky outcrop. The shaped charge had penetrated the tank's 30mm side armor, detonating ammunition stores. All 5 crew members were killed instantly. Within minutes, 3 more German tanks were burning. The American infantry weren't fleeing as expected. They were standing their ground, working in teams, one soldier carrying ammunition while another operated the launcher. They used the broken terrain expertly, firing from defilade positions where only the launcher tube was exposed. German tank commanders, trained to scan for anti-tank guns and enemy tanks, found themselves searching for individual soldiers who could appear, fire, and disappear in seconds. Koenig ordered his remaining tanks to retreat, reporting to division headquarters. The Americans have a new anti-tank weapon. Very dangerous, effective at close range. Every infantry squad seems to have them. We cannot advance through broken terrain without infantry support. The Battle of Sidi Bou Zid continued for 2 days, ultimately resulting in an American defeat with the loss of over 100 tanks and 1,400 casualties. But the German victory was tempered by unexpected losses to infantry weapons. Post-battle analysis by the 10th Panzer Division noted that 12 tanks had been lost to what they initially called rocket projectors before learning the American term bazooka. At Kasserine Pass, between February 19th to 25th, German forces achieved their most significant tactical victory against American forces, pushing them back over 50 miles and capturing significant equipment. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, temporarily in command of all Axis forces in Tunisia, had exploited American inexperience and poor defensive positions to achieve a breakthrough that threatened the entire Allied position in Tunisia. Among the captured materials were several M1 Bazookas, complete with ammunition and operating manuals. German engineers examined them with initial skepticism that quickly turned to amazement and then to concern. The weapon was absurdly simple, almost primitively so compared to German anti-tank weapons. An electrical firing system powered by 2 common flashlight batteries sent current through a wire to ignite the rocket motor. The rocket motor burned for only 0.3 seconds, completely consuming its propellant before the rocket left the tube, eliminating the dangerous backblast that plagued the German Panzerfaust then under development. The tube itself was nothing special, just steel with a simple wire sight and wooden shoulder rest. Most critically, the shaped charge principle focused explosive energy into a jet of superheated metal capable of penetrating armor far beyond what the warhead's size suggested. Major Hans von Luck, examining a captured bazooka at 10th Panzer Division headquarters, told his staff, "Gentlemen, observe carefully. This weapon weighs 13 pounds. Our Pak 38 anti-tank gun weighs 2,000 pounds and requires a prime mover and crew of 4. Yet this simple tube can penetrate the side armor of any tank we possess. If every American infantry squad has 1 or 2 of these weapons, our entire doctrine of armored warfare is threatened. We can no longer count on infantry fleeing before our tanks." The implications were staggering. German armored doctrine, refined through campaigns in Poland, France, the Balkans, and Russia, depended on tanks breaking through enemy lines and causing panic among infantry. Foot soldiers were expected to flee from tanks unless they had anti-tank guns, which were heavy, immobile, and easily spotted. The bazooka changed this fundamental assumption. Now every infantryman was potentially an anti-tank gunner. The German response was immediate and telling. Rather than dismissing the bazooka as inferior, captured examples from both North African and Eastern Front encounters were promptly shipped to Germany for reverse engineering. The Heereswaffenamt, Army Weapons Office, assigned the project highest priority. Within weeks, German engineers had created their own version, increasing the warhead diameter from 60 mm to 88 mm for greater penetration. The weapon they called the Raketenpanzerbüchse 43, soon nicknamed Panzerschreck, Tank Terror, would enter production by late 1943. But copying the weapon was easier than countering its effects. By March 1943, the bazooka's impact was transforming battlefield dynamics across Tunisia. German tank crews could no longer operate with the freedom they had enjoyed since 1940. Every pile of rocks, every fold in the ground, every cactus patch could conceal a bazooka team. The rough terrain of Tunisia, which should have channeled Allied forces into kill zones for German armor, instead provided perfect ambush sites for bazooka teams. Lieutenant Friedrich Schulz of the 15th Panzer Division, writing in his diary on March 15th, captured the new reality. Yesterday we lost 3 tanks in 5 minutes to American infantry hiding in an olive grove. We never saw them until the rockets were already in flight. The American infantry no longer run when they see our tanks. They hide, they wait, they attack from the sides and rear. We have lost 7 tanks this week to these rocket weapons. The men are becoming nervous, seeing threats in every shadow. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction. Tank crews trained for aggressive action became cautious, even hesitant. The Panzer spirit that had carried German armour across Europe was being eroded by fear of an enemy they often couldn't see until too late. Tank commanders who once rode with open hatches for better visibility now buttoned up, accepting restricted vision for protection. This reduced their situational awareness and made coordination more difficult. German tactics began changing immediately. Standing orders were modified to require infantry escorts for all tank movements through restricted terrain. Tanks were ordered to suppress likely ambush positions with machine gun fire, expending enormous amounts of ammunition on empty positions. Speed through dangerous areas was emphasized, but this made accurate shooting difficult and increased mechanical breakdowns in the harsh desert conditions. On March 23, 1943, at El Guettar, the 10th Panzer Division launched an attack that demonstrated the new reality. 50 German tanks advanced into the valley, expecting to scatter the American infantry as they had done at Kasserine. The attack was personally ordered by Field Marshal Rommel as his last offensive action in Africa before returning to Germany for medical treatment. Instead of fleeing infantry, German tanks encountered a carefully prepared defence orchestrated by Major General George Patton, who had taken command of 2nd Corps after Kasserine. Patton had studied the German tactics and prepared accordingly. Bazooka teams were positioned in mutually supporting positions where they could engage German tanks from multiple angles. They were supported by mines to channel German movement and artillery registered on likely tank positions. The German attack began at dawn with the standard tactics that had brought victory across Europe. Tanks advanced in wedge formation, using their superior guns to engage American positions at long range, while machine guns suppressed infantry. Initially, the attack progressed well, overrunning forward positions of the 1st Infantry Division. But as German tanks entered the valley proper, the trap was sprung. Bazooka teams opened fire from concealed positions on the ridges. The first rockets struck the lighter side armour of the advancing Panzers. A Panzer IV, commanded by Oberleutnant Hans Müller, took a rocket in the engine compartment, brewing up immediately. Another rocket struck the tracks of a Panzer III, immobilizing it for following shots that penetrated the turret ring. The German tanks found themselves in a kill zone. When they turned to engage bazooka teams on one ridge, they exposed their sides to teams on the opposite ridge. The broken terrain that should have provided cover instead created dead zones where tanks couldn't depress their guns enough to engage infantry on slopes above them. Within an hour, 30 German tanks were destroyed or disabled. Gefreiter Kurt Hoffmann, a loader in a Panzer IV that survived the battle, later recalled, "It was like being in a shooting gallery, except we were the targets." Every rock, every fold in the ground seemed to hide Americans with those tubes. We would see a flash, hear the distinctive whoosh of the rocket, and then another tank would be burning. We couldn't stay still to aim properly, couldn't advance through the mines, couldn't retreat without exposing our rear armour. It was hopeless. The attack collapsed, and German forces retreated, leaving destroyed tanks littering the valley. The battle demonstrated that properly employed bazooka teams could stop a German armoured attack without heavy anti-tank guns or tank support. Colonel Wilhelm Ritter, captured after the engagement when his command tank was disabled, told interrogators, "Your bazooka has changed everything. We built our tactics on tanks being stopped only by other tanks or heavy guns that we could identify and destroy. Now every American soldier is potentially an anti-tank weapon. A squad of infantry in good positions with these weapons is more dangerous than a battery of anti-tank guns." The numbers were staggering. American production reached 5,000 units monthly by spring 1943. Virtually every American rifle company in North Africa had been allocated 9 bazookas, 1 per squad. Infantry commanders who had previously felt helpless against enemy armor now had organic anti-tank capability. German intelligence estimated that over 8,000 bazookas were deployed in Tunisia by April 1943. German countermeasures grew increasingly desperate and complex. Schürzen, steel side skirts originally designed to defeat Soviet anti-tank rifles, were welded to tanks to provide standoff protection against shaped charges. The skirts would detonate the warhead before it reached the main armor, dissipating its energy. But these additions made tanks wider, making movement through narrow streets and mountain passes more difficult. They also added weight that increased fuel consumption and mechanical strain. Vision ports were protected with additional armor plates that could be closed in combat, but this severely restricted visibility. Concrete blocks and sandbags were added around turrets, giving tanks an improvised, almost ramshackle appearance that contrasted sharply with the clean lines of German engineering. Wire mesh screens were welded above engine decks to detonate rockets before they could penetrate the thinner top armor. Infantry escorts became mandatory for all tank movements, but this slowed advances to walking pace and made coordination complex. The infantry themselves were vulnerable to artillery and machine gun fire that tanks had previously suppressed. The combined arms tactics that had brought victory in earlier campaigns became cumbersome defensive arrangements. April 1943 brought new variants of the bazooka to the battlefield. The M1A1, using an improved M6A1 rocket, addressed the reliability problems that had plagued the early M1 model. The new rocket had better electrical contacts, improved propellant that was less sensitive to temperature extremes, and a modified warhead that detonated more reliably on impact. German tank crews noted the improvement immediately. Fewer misfires meant more effective ambushes. The M9 Bazooka also began arriving, featuring an improved electrical firing system using a magneto instead of batteries, eliminating the problem of dead batteries in combat. The tube could be broken down into 2 sections for easier transport, particularly valuable for airborne troops. The M6A3 rocket solved the deflection problem with a rounded nose that gripped sloped armor rather than glancing off, making shots against angled armor more effective. Major General Ernst Müller, commanding elements of the 15th Panzer Division, issued new standing orders that revealed the complete transformation of German armored tactics. No tank will operate without infantry support. All movement in areas with cover will be conducted at maximum speed. Suspicious positions will be engaged with machine gun fire before advancing. Tanks will not pursue enemy infantry into broken terrain. When engaging enemy positions, one tank will provide suppressing fire while others advance. Under no circumstances will tanks enter towns or forests without thorough reconnaissance. The campaign in Tunisia reached its climax in May 1943. The Allied forces, reinforced and resupplied, launched Operation Vulcan to destroy the remaining Axis forces trapped in an ever-shrinking pocket around Tunis and Bizerte. German tank crews, exhausted and running low on fuel and ammunition, found themselves fighting defensive battles against enemies who grew more confident with their bazookas daily. Unteroffizier Hans Bergmann of the Hermann Göring Division wrote to his wife on May 8th, "The Americans are no longer the green troops we faced at Kasserine. They have learned to use their rocket weapons with deadly effect. Yesterday I watched a single American soldier destroy 2 of our tanks. He fired, moved to a new position, and fired again before we could react. We who once ruled the battlefield now cower behind our armor, knowing it cannot protect us." The final surrenders came on May 13th, 1943. Over 250,000 Axis soldiers became prisoners, including the remains of the once proud Afrika Korps. Among the captured equipment, Allied forces found numerous German tanks modified with improvised armor, evidence of desperate attempts to counter the bazooka threat. But the bazooka's impact extended far beyond Tunisia. Reports from the Eastern Front indicated that Soviet forces, supplied with bazookas through Lend-Lease, were using them effectively against German armor. The weapon that had seemed a minor curiosity when first captured was recognized as a fundamental shift in infantry tank dynamics. In Sicily, July 1943, the bazooka achieved what German tankers considered impossible. During the fighting near Gela, an M1A1 bazooka, operated by Private Robert Stevens of the 1st Infantry Division, scored a hit through the driver's vision slot of a Tiger I heavy tank from the 2nd Company, Schwer Panzerabteilung 504. The Tiger, with frontal armor up to 100 mm thick, had been considered invulnerable to anything less than the heaviest anti-tank guns. The 88 mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Yet the bazooka rocket, fired at less than 50 meters, found the one vulnerable point. The shaped charge jet penetrated the vision block, sprayed molten metal into the driver's compartment, and set off ammunition stored in the hull. The massive tank, pride of German engineering, was destroyed by a weapon carried by one man. The incident sent shockwaves through German armored units. Emergency modifications were ordered for all Tiger tanks. Additional armor around vision slits, wire mesh screens to detonate rockets prematurely, and concrete blocks added to vulnerable areas. But these modifications further reduced the already limited visibility and added weight to tanks already suffering from mechanical reliability issues. The German Panzerschreck, their enlarged copy of the bazooka, began reaching frontline units in late 1943. With its 88 mm warhead providing significantly greater penetration than the American 60 mm version, capable of penetrating 160 mm of armor compared to the bazooka's 80 mm, it was presented as superior German engineering. The first units were issued to specialized tank hunter teams, but production never matched the widespread distribution of the American weapon. Yet frontline soldiers recognized the irony. Unteroffizier Kurt Wagner of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division noted in his diary, "We copied the American weapon and made it bigger. That is all. They showed us the way, and we followed." The production disparity was insurmountable and revealing. While America mass-produced simple, effective weapons, Germany struggled with increasingly complex tank designs that required specialized materials and skilled workers. A Tiger tank required 300,000 man-hours to produce and cost 250,000 Reichsmarks. A bazooka required less than 10 man-hours and cost $20 to manufacture. By war's end, America produced nearly 500,000 bazookas. Germany would struggle to produce 290,000 Panzerschrecks throughout the entire conflict, despite desperate need. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, inspecting Atlantic wall defenses in January 1944, recognized the implications for the anticipated Allied invasion. In a report to Hitler, he wrote, "The Americans have given every infantry squad the firepower that once required a specialist anti-tank unit. Our beach defenses must assume that enemy infantry can destroy our tanks at close range. We must completely revise our defensive preparations, creating kill zones that prevent infantry from approaching our armor." The Normandy invasion in June 1944 showcased the bazooka's maturation into a primary weapon system. American forces landed with thousands of M9A1 bazookas, the latest variant with improved optical sights and better rocket motors. Each infantry regiment had an anti-tank company with 18 bazookas in addition to the organic weapons in rifle companies. Airborne troops, dropping behind German lines, carried lightweight M9A1s broken down for the jump. German beach defenders, expecting to face landing craft and light weapons, instead encountered infantry with unprecedented anti-tank capability. The 21st Panzer Division, the same unit that had first encountered bazookas in Tunisia, launched a counterattack toward the beaches on D-Day afternoon. They were stopped not by Allied tanks, most of which hadn't yet landed, but by British and American infantry, with PIATs and bazookas. In the hedgerow country of Normandy, the bazooka proved devastating. The bocage, ancient hedgerows growing on raised earth banks, created a maze of small fields perfect for ambush. German tanks, channeled into narrow lanes between hedgerows, became easy prey for bazooka teams hiding in the thick vegetation. Panzer Commander Hauptmann Ernst Zimmermann of the 12th SS Panzer Division reported in July, "We cannot operate freely. Every hedge may hide death. The Yarbos, fighter bombers, attack us from above, and the infantry with their rockets attack from ground level. We have become mobile artillery, hiding behind hills rather than leading attacks. My company has lost more tanks to these rocket weapons than to enemy tanks." By August 1944, German tank losses to infantry weapons exceeded those to enemy tanks in several sectors. The Wehrmacht War Diary noted, "Infantry anti-tank weapons have become a primary threat to our armoured forces. Traditional tank superiority can no longer be assumed." The statistics revealed the complete transformation. 1940. Less than 5% of German tanks destroyed by infantry weapons. 1941. 8% destroyed by infantry weapons. 1942. 12% destroyed by infantry weapons. 1943. 28% destroyed by infantry weapons. 1944. 41% destroyed by infantry weapons. 1945. 57% destroyed by infantry weapons. The development continued relentlessly. The M18 recoilless rifle, entering service in late 1944, offered even greater penetration with less weight. The M20 Super Bazooka was in development, with an 89mm warhead capable of defeating any German armour. In the Ardennes offensive of December 1944, Germany's last major armoured operation in the West, the bazooka played a crucial defensive role. American troops, initially surprised and outnumbered, used bazookas to stop German spearheads in crucial locations. At St. Vith, bazooka teams held off German armour long enough for reinforcements to arrive. At Bastogne, surrounded paratroopers used bazookas to destroy German tanks attempting to break into the town. By early 1945, the transformation of German armoured forces was complete. Tank crews who had once charged across Europe now crept cautiously through terrain, scanning constantly for the telltale flash of a rocket launch. The Panzers that had embodied offensive warfare had become defensive weapons, used primarily as mobile anti-tank guns supporting infantry. In March 1945, as American forces pushed into Germany itself, they encountered Volkssturm units, elderly men and boys, armed with captured bazookas and Panzerfausts. The weapon that had seemed impossibly simple to German engineers in 1943 had become their last desperate defense. The 6 tanks of the 21st Panzer Division approaching American positions near Kasserine Pass on January 30, 1943, had represented German armoured supremacy built through years of combat experience and technical development. Within months, that supremacy was gone forever, destroyed not by superior tanks, but by a simple tube that embodied American pragmatism and industrial might. Unteroffizier Klaus Richter, who had dismissed those metal tubes carried by American infantry, was killed when a bazooka team destroyed his tank near Gafsa in March 1943. His final letter home, found on his body, contained a prophetic observation. "The Americans have changed the rules of war. Every infantry soldier is now our enemy, not just their tanks and anti-tank guns. We cannot advance without fear, cannot rest without vigilance. The weapon they carry on their shoulders has made our tanks, which once made us masters of the battlefield, into steel coffins." The lesson was clear and enduring. In modern warfare, the side that can arm every soldier as a tank killer will defeat the side that relies on tanks alone. German tank crews weren't just defeated by a weapon. They were defeated by a system that could conceive, produce, and distribute that weapon in quantities they never imagined possible. Their story stands as proof that no military advantage is permanent and innovation can come from the most unexpected directions. The transformation from hunter to hunted took less than 6 months in North Africa, but its implications shaped armored warfare forever. Every anti-tank missile system today traces its conceptual lineage to that simple steel tube first carried by American soldiers in 1942. The bazooka proved that in war, as in nature, evolution favors not the strongest but the most adaptable. German tanks, magnificent products of engineering excellence, could not adapt to a battlefield where every enemy soldier potentially carried their destruction. American industry, flexible and innovative, had created a weapon that democratized anti-tank warfare and forever changed the balance between infantry and armor.